all. Welcome you all to this wonderful academic event. We are so glad to have you all here to attend the public lecture by Dr. Vijay Varghese. Our chairperson, Professor Michael Tharagan, is not able to attend the session by person due to some personal reasons. First of all, I welcome Professor Arunima, Director of KCHR, who will preside over the session. We would like to extend a special thanks to our guest of honor, Dr. Vijay Varghese, Associate Professor, Department of History, University of Hyderabad, and at present a scholar in residence. He will be speaking later on the topic, Fear of Numbers, Demographic Anxieties, and Syrian Christian Responses in Kerala. I cordially welcome the entire participants and our KCHR team for being here. We would especially like to say welcome to the audience who joined via Zoom Meet. At the end of the speech, we will have a question and answer session. For those who attend the program via Zoom Meet, can use the raise hand option. You can ask the questions once your name is called. Once again, thank you everyone for being here to watch a wonderful lecture. I invite Professor Arunima to preside over the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Fasha. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Vijay Varghese, whom I've known for now, I think, close to a little over 2 decades. Varghese, as Fasha said, teaches in the Department of History in the School of Social Sciences at the University of Hyderabad. He's an associate professor there. His work, even though this particular talk is coming from other academic and political interests of his main work has been on a very important theme, that of migration. He has looked specifically at the question of migration among Syrian Christians in Kerala, thinking about a variety of issues, including land reclamation, agrarian expansion, and so on. But what's important for us to remember is how relevant this theme is when we speak about changing political contexts, the nature of new kinds of transformations that are happening worldwide, and the kinds of ways in which we need to think about, in a nuanced way, about changes that are going on in different parts of the world. For instance, one of the main reasons for migration that we have witnessed in this country in recent times was COVID. Nobody in this room will be able to forget the image of migrant workers fleeing from different parts of the country to their homelands, to small villages from where they had migrated to work in big cities. This is an image that is enduring, and it sort of opens up a whole range of issues, including that of poverty and destitution, the lack of work, issues of labor, the conditions under which people live, and the kind of cruel and heartless ways in which you may be abandoned in the context of a global pandemic. Another example is that of conflict situations. Nobody, again, I think, in this room, because most of Kerala's audience is very literate, both in textual ways and in visual ways, will ever forget the image of a small Syrian child lying dead on a beach. He was an immigrant child. The kind of wars and conflicts in the world have led to global migrations of a kind that we have not witnessed for a very, very long time. Perhaps this is world historically one of the periods, the decades, when migration is happening on this scale. But as Varghese's work shows, there are any number of reasons, whether it's from imperial and global context, whether it's issues about religion, or whether it's about other kinds of politics, people have migrated for all manners of reasons, and his interests are in studying these different kinds of aspects that make migration relevant for our contemporary times. He has, along with other scholars, co-edited a number of volumes dealing with issues locally and globally, and also nationally on issues of migration. They have been published by very prestigious presses like Cambridge University and Routledge and so on. I think it's also important for us to mention here that he has held several fellowships in different parts of the world, from the University of Edinburgh, the Central European University at Budapest, at the University of Singapore, and also at the University of Sussex. So we are delighted that we have Varghese with us today as a scholar in residence in KCHR. And let me take this opportunity to introduce to our audience our Scholar in Residence program, where we actually invite scholars who have contributed to Kerala studies or South Indian studies and who have made a mark in the study of different kinds of themes, be it issues of history or social sciences and humanities, to come and spend 3 months with us. And in this period, the scholars in residence engage with a whole range of issues in relation to the research proposal that they are working on at that time, but they also, in addition to that, give 2 public lectures. So this is the first of Dr. Varghese's public lectures. The second one will be in Kottayam. And for those in Trivandrum who are interested in his second public lecture, please do join by Zoom then. So with those words, let me welcome Dr. Varghese.
Good afternoon, friends. Thank you, Professor Arinima, for that very generous introduction. Let me thank the KCHR right at the outset for inviting me as a scholar in residence, which enabled me to, have 3 months off from the routines at the University of Hyderabad. My special thanks to Professor Tharagan, Dr. Arinima, and Professor Sanil Mohan for this generous invitation. The theme that I'm going to speak about today is from a kind of work which I have just initiated. So it's a kind of work in progress. My ideas are rudimentary. So your comments at this stage would be very useful. So as you can see, I have titled it as Fear of Numbers, Demographic Anxieties and the Syrian Christian Responses in Kerala. In the backdrop of this growing anxiety among the Christians of Kerala, particularly among the Syrian Christians, about their dwindling proportion in the population, I want to look at the demographic transition of the community from the early 20th century to the present day. My intention is to do this today by exploring 3 specific historic demographic contexts in modern times and the heterogeneous responses that the Syrian Christian community in particular offered to those situations of numerical angst. The first context is the statist or Hindu anxiety on the growing proportion of Christians in the early 20th century Travancore, reaching a kind of flashpoint in the 1930s, which was confronted by the Syrian Christians by reiterating the positive ties that the community had with the state and its wealth creation enterprises. The second context is the developmentalist anxieties in the mid-20th century Kerala as manifested in the birth control and family planning strategies, which was combated with a considered argument in which visions of faith as well as rationalities of appropriately utilizing available resources found a kind of meeting place. The third context is the current context, which is perhaps still unfolding, of a self-perceived crisis of falling demographic significance, which engenders a set of strategies which include advocacy of large families and early marriages, apart from a kind of growing resentment towards the Muslim community in Kerala. And by this exercise, I hope to show that the contestations driven by population numbers and proportions are historically contingent and could be used for diverse and conflicting purposes. The population numbers evoke different senses in different historical circumstances, engendering multifarious responses from diverse constituencies, making us to think about the fluidity of the meaning as implicated in the population numbers. Can we go to the first slide? You know, Travancore, if you look at the demographic history of Travancore, let me go to the first context. We can see that Travancore was one of the fastest growing population in India, at least from the late 19th century onwards. You can see it in the slide. And the first two census reports of the 20th century, for instance, have very positively evaluated this higher population and higher growth rate. And this was projected as showing a progressive Travancore, right? Endowed with better material conditions, public health infrastructure, and female infanticide and child marriages absent. And interestingly, Travancore is often compared not only with other states and provinces in the country, but also sometimes with Western countries to show this positive entitlement of, as implicated in the population growth of Travancore. Now, this kind of a happiness and confidence developed into a kind of disquiet with the 1931 census. You can see the numbers there, right? Where population began to be discussed as a problem in the making, right? If it is not already one. Now, the 1931 census report says many countries have begun to outrun the means of subsistence in relation to population. And Travancore has already reached or nearing that stage. And between 1921 and 31, when the area of cultivation has expanded only by 9.6%, population has increased by 27.2%, right? So as a result, it was very evident that population is outgrowing the means of subsistence and the enterprises to increase agricultural production. Now, by 1941, when the census report was published, this angst was slightly eased because that decade shows growth rate declining from 27.2% to 19.1%, right? Of course, we know that that was a decade of economic turmoil with its severe impact, on the state, as reflected in a series of reports produced in Travancore during that time, whether it is economic depression, unemployment, banking, rural indebtedness, etc., etc. Right? Can we go to the next slide? One more. Yeah. So Travancore population was also undergoing, interestingly, a kind of significant amount of change in terms of the configuration of religious communities during this time. The prime category by which the British census categorized Indians, as we know, religion and caste. The growing proportion of Christians in the population has captured the attention of the administration of the self-proclaimed Hindu state of Travancore, at least in the early 20th century. The census report of 1901, the census commissioner of that time foregrounds this high proportion of the Christian element, as he referred to it, as highlighting a prosperous career having for Christianity in the state, making Travancore the most Christian territory in all India. Again, writing the Travancore State Manual in 1906, V. Nagamaya reports the same thing, and he compares the Christian population in Travancore with other states in the country and then concludes, I quote, "Thus we have a rare phenomenon that the conservative Hindu state of Travancore is much less Hindu than even the Mohammedan state of Hyderabad." But at the same time, Ayya was eloquent in admitting that the reason for the falling Hindu population was the oppressive caste system, which with its sharpest embodiments in Travancore that offered little chance for socio-economic mobility for the lower castes. And he continues that under such a predicament, lower castes had no second thoughts to transfer their allegiance to the European missionary and his religion, which was brought with deliverance to them from the trammels of old world civilization, as he said it. Now, also in an earlier report, he credited the Christian missionaries for the heroism of raising the lower caste from the slough of degradation and debasement by going to their humble dwellings and awaken them to a sense of better earthly existence, which was an element of civilization unknown to ancient India. He also registers equally a concealed fear that, I quote, if there is no doubt that as time goes on, these neglected classes will be completely absorbed into the Christian fold. Next slide. Accompanied by this burgeoning disquiet about the increasing share of the Christians was an attempt to portray it as a result of the praiseworthy tolerance of the native government from remote ages. And often Lord Viceroy's appreciation in this regard was invoked. And this is a statement from the census of 1891, where the census commissioner has reported that, said that it is remarkable proof of this religious tolerance that Travancore, 20% of the population are Christians against 2% of population in Madras Presidency. From the earliest stages of the sway of Hindu monarchs in Malabar, the Hindu, Muslim, the Christian, and the Jew have equally enjoyed the protection, the friendship, and sympathy of the government. While on the other part, they have all willingly labored for the prosperity of the Commonwealth without any of those unpleasant asperities and collusions that have disfigured their later relations elsewhere. So basically, tolerance and protection offered by the state thus enabled communities like Christians to labor hard for the prosperity of the state. So that was the message. Such eulogization of a virtuous and promotive regime was continued in the subsequent decades too, albeit the not so concealed discomfort with the growth of Christian proportion and size. And even in the 1911 and 21 census, there is, statements which shows that the loss of Hindus has been so heavy, over decades. Next slide. Now, these statist majoritarian anxieties hardened with the passing of time. The demographic numbers brought about by the 1931 census became an important reference point for fanning the fear towards this influential minority. And as you can see, the census report shows that the Hindu population has declined to 61.5% from 69% between 1901 and 1931, whereas Christians increased from 24% to 31.5%. And the proportion of the Muslims, the Muhammadans, remained almost the same with marginal increase. Now, the dramatic transition of transition in the community demography of the princely state over the 100 years. Next slide. From 1820 to 1931 is shown here. Of course, 1820 figure is coming from a survey by Warden Corner. It is not a census report, but then the tables are created in the census report in such a way that, to create an impression that dramatically, this population has basically increased. Now, the issue of growing Christian clout found its expression from multiple demographic vantage points. If you look at various ways this problem has been explained, right? It is stated that in the course of little more than a century, the total population of the state multiplied by just 5.6%, whereas in which Hindus expanded by 4.2 times, Christians by 14.3 times, and Muslims by 8.4 times. And the largest increase among Christians is said as because of conversions and due to the high birth rate among the Syrian Christians, right? And even if conversion is excluded, it is said that the natural growth rate and natural increase of Christians is far above that of the Hindus. And there are instances in which imaginary numbers are brought from 18th century, etc., to show this sort of a dramatic change. Now, pointed comparisons in particular was consistently made between Hindus and Christians. Between 1901 and 1931, when Hindus have increased by 54%, the Christians have increased by 130%, the census report says. Next. Not only census reports, but also other state publications reflected this anxiety. The Travancore State Manual, T.K. Velupilla, written in 1940, after describing the dramatic increase of Christian population, of course by citing from the 1931 census, said that no Indian state or province contains more Christians than Travancore. Nowhere in the whole world is a state ruled by a non-Christian monarch which has such a large Christian population as Travancore. So thus Travancore presents a diversity of races and religion in fostering the shade of an uninterrupted toleration rarely paralleled in the history of the world. Followers of different faith have lived here and pursued their moral and material welfare for centuries. So such adulations were there. So a kinship nourished by a laws of dharma as expounded in the Dharma Shastras, Upanishads, Idihasas and Puranas, also said to have facilitated the spread of Christianity by its generous attitude, right? But at the same time, the anxiety about the growing demographic clout of Christians is apparent in these renderings. Now, the same decade also witnessed attempts to secularize population problem in Travancore by underscoring the urgency of controlling the population. Kesari Balakrishna Pilla, for instance, became an advocate of population control in a series of editorials written by him in the early 1933, after the publication of the census report, of course, on population problem of Travancore. He brilliantly overlooked the disaggregation within the population in terms of religious communities and called for measures to control population. He was convinced that the astronomical growth of population will accelerate poverty in a country in which majority live already in poverty. For him, it was a disease that needs to be treated with strong medication. And his medication was birth control through artificial means. He called upon the government to wake up from its sleep, start sustained campaign to make the people aware of its necessity, apart from offering incentives and support, and of course accompanied by strong legal interventions. Now, a year later, in 1934, writing another editorial in Kesari itself, he discussed the proposals advanced by Margaret Sanger, the radical American birth control activist, on particularly about licensing system on producing children. Couples should take license from the government for having children every time. And license will be given after assessing the health condition and economic situation of the couple. And he said that even though it sounds very radical and revolutionary, Keralite should take her suggestion seriously and evolve birth control legal system that suit the situation of Travancore or Kerala. And interestingly, Kesari was not the lone voice to underscore this secular developmentalist imperatives that should guide initiatives aimed at socio-cultural reconstruction of Travancore. Writing in 1937, V. Achyuta Menon placed cooperation and communal amity as the foundation to development, where secular matters should not be combined with religion, and the majority worked towards strengthening the confidence of the minority. In the same decade, also witnessed interventions of people like K.C. Maman Mappila, who reiterated the caste character of Travancore's communal problem as against the religious color as the princely state was seemingly trying to build. Next slide. Now, in 1941, when the census report published, of course, this anxieties continues, but then, as I said already, the population growth has declined to 19.1% from the preceding 27.2%. And the census gave the state some kind of relief, also because of the fact that the declining rate among the Hindus have also reduced. The proportional decline has been lesser in the last decade, which was around 1.1%, 61.6% to 60.5% compared to the preceding date. Now, the reason given by the census report is that during the decade, conversions to other religions have definitely declined. Second reason was that during the recent years, conversion back to Hinduism has been a special feature, right? And then it actually cited the Temple Entry Proclamation in the context of this, where, next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Where the real demographic and political intention of the Temple Entry Proclamation becomes clear. Solicitous that none of His Highness subjects should, by reason of birth or caste or community, be denied the consolations and solace of the Hindu faith. And the Temple Entry Proclamation epitomized this necessity. And this is what is precisely said in this report. Unapproachability and untouchability, which had driven many Hindu to leave his fold to seek solace in the other religions, were removed by this proclamation. It arrested the forces of disintegration in the Hindu society and must have had its effect both in reducing the number of converts to other religions and in encouraging several of those who had already left Hinduism to come back to the fold. At the same time, the report has speak about the decline of Hindus, again by using various demographic vantage points. Now, as pointed out already, the high growth of Christians along with the conversion argument was explained in terms of the high fertility rate of Syrian Christians, right? The high fertility was enabled by a ready exposure to and acceptance of modern healthcare systems, high literacy. Many people were also working in the healthcare system already, but also the spell of prosperity that Syrian Christians achieved in the early 20th century by making use of the new economic opportunities opened up by modernity, especially through commercial agriculture, reclamation, and agrarian expansion. And a new relation came to be posited between state and the citizen, where the citizen are not simply born into modern states. They must basically fashion themselves as industrious subjects, as contributors of wealth and well-being, to claim citizenship for themselves. In turn, the state bestows benevolent care on citizens, creating ideal conditions for their functioning as hardworking and obedient subjects. And there was this reiteration of this long history of such a positive ties between, the state and the citizen, the Syrian Christians and the native state. While the state acknowledged their law-abiding disposition and labor for the prosperity of the state, the Syrian Christians used to proudly cite this long history of being industrious subjects of the Hindu kings and of being rewarded for their hard work and law-abiding character and uprightness, positioning themselves as a community committed to development and progress of their own as well as that of the country. Inherent in the argument was a suggestion that an industrious citizen can participate in nation building without abandoning community identities. The Syrian Christians considered Travancore as a state with Hindu government under which all religious communities are supposed to have no unfreedom. And whenever such established principles is violated, the virtue of positive ties and morality of upholding it were brought into discussion. The state was reminded of its morality by the productive citizen. However, what one could see was a situation of breakdown of this much celebrated positive ties from the 1930s due to the hardening of the Hindu state and Hindu anxieties, much informed by the demographic change and the political engagement of the Christians, which is best manifested in C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer's blatant favoritism towards Nayars, promotion of Hinduism, and animosity towards Christians. And of course, hostility towards, attempts to promote Nayar Syrian Christianity. Christians, on their part, took a turn to abstention in the company of Iravas and Muslims. Besides resisting Irava Muslim and Syrian Christian demands for proportional representation in legislative bodies, CP led a formidable effort to consolidate and revitalize the Hindus through a range of measures. And temple entry proclamation is allegedly to prevent, the disgruntled Irava elites who are planning to convert, right? And right from the 1920s, options to convert to Buddhism and Sikhism were mooted. Iravas were, of course, more interested to convert to Christianity, with, of course, their social motives than religious motives, as Lucy Overcook has said, and wanted to get converted as a body, not as individuals, right? And clearly seeing the political purpose of conversion. And interestingly, many missions were out there to work among the Iravas by seeing this opportunity to convert. And this, of course, say for instance, Marthoma Church has actually, recruited thousands of youngsters or volunteers to work among the Iravas. The CMS has instituted a special mission for Iravas, to make use of the opportunity. And of course, this sent shockwaves to this to Diwan as well as the All India Harijan Sangh, Sevak Sangh, because 16% of the Iravas and 32% of Christians together will change the Hindu character of the state. Now, this conversion argument got strengthened, particularly after C. Keshavan's arrest, in the Koranjeri speech, following the Koranjeri speech, and C.V. Kunjiraman's determined attempt to convert en masse, right? And he was in touch with the Church of India bishop in Kottayam, and he wanted to convert en masse, right? Now, it was in response. Again, one more thing. In May 1936, the Joint Political Congress meeting at Changanasheri has demanded the government of Travancore and Cochin to pass a law like that of British India to give property rights to the new converts. And obviously, the message was very clear to the Diwan. And the Travancore temple entry proclamation was thus aimed at Hindu integration against Christianity in that sense. Also, CP embarked on a course of counter-reformation measures. Counter-reformation measures, as Lucy Overcook again called it, to consolidate Hindus and their temples. Trainings were given to priests in scriptures and Sanskrit. A central religious library was established in Trivandrum. Bhajans, popular bhajans were introduced in temples. Also, there was an attempt to withdrawal of school fee concession to the depressed classes from those who have converted to Christianity. And this was coupled with Diwan's welcoming of Hindu Mahasabha to Travancore. The visit of Savarkar, the friendship started leading later Savarkar to support the demand of independent Travancore. The support also was given to a mission called Kerala Hindu Mission to reconvert Christians to Hinduism. The Kerala Hindu Mission, according to the 1941 census report, alone have reconverted 80,000 persons back to the Hindu fold, right? And which was since its establishment in 1934, right? Of course, an organization run by elite Hindus. Interestingly, V.S. Subramania Iyer, who was the Diwan of Travancore between 1929 to 32, became its president in 1934, right? Now, later actions of Diwan II, his repressive measures against the Joint Political Conference set up by, these three communities, and later against the Travancore State Congress, right? His alleged role in the destruction of the Syrian Christian banks, his hostility towards international fellowship, which wanted to build reconciliation measures in Travancore, his attempt to take over schools run by the minorities for, the state, for statedly welfare intentions, right? All this came to be interpreted in the light of his open support to the high caste project of Hindu community building and consolidation. And his wrath was particularly directed towards the Syrian Christians, right? Interestingly, it is, however, important to note that the Christian response to these attacks was not just to assert their religious identity, but draw upon the discourse of industrious and law-abiding subjects. Within a self-identified Hindu minorities, Hindu state, minorities could only appeal to these age-old moral obligations of the king. And collapse of this age-old state morality has been decried by the Syrian constituencies alongside active political mobilization. Now, the second context that I would like to discuss today is the context in the mid-20th century, 1950s and 60s, when the family planning through artificial birth control was proposed to forcefully as a panacea to the burgeoning development crisis in Kerala. Birth control and family planning was seen as necessity for survival, as well as an avenue for fostering plant development. J. Deviga has done a wonderful history of family planning. She pointed out that it was also a reflection of Kerala's resilience to build a subnational developmental identity and to assert its self-made difference from other states, as the state, since independence, consistently felt marginalization from the center in terms of allocations, both fiscal as well as non-fiscal. She also argues that this acceptance to family planning was forced upon by a loss of optimism that Malayalis once nurtured during their engagement with modernity. However, when it was posited as a development option, the new scheme implied regulating human force as a development option, and hence had to confront with the development options already in circulation, which were basically aimed at making use of the available human force as well as the natural wealth around. The church, particularly the Syrian Christian church and the communists, rose in opposition to family planning. The church, for its ethical and moral and religious incorrectness, and the later for its inefficiency while comparing with other superior way outs. Both of them perhaps eventually went silent or either endorsed it later by 1960s. Now, the church opposition to family planning was very vociferous. I'm drawing particularly from the articles published in the church periodicals, particularly in the Syrian Catholic constituencies, and of course those published in the general press as well. Church argued on the one hand that it would be sinful to use God-gifted reproductive capacity just for satisfying selfish carnal pleasures, repudiating the divine injection to control births through artificial means. In 1961, the Bishop of Varghese declared birth control as the biggest destructive movement in modern times, destroying the holiness of marriage and disrupting conjugal life, a tangential attempt to create comfort against the commands of the Creator, and hence should be forbidden to all, whether Hindus, Muslims, or Christians who believe in the existence of God. Any policy of sterilization, the church argued, would run wives into prostitutes. Holy Family would become a house of harlots, and love would be reduced to sexual pleasure. An evil in itself cannot be posited as a solution to the evil of poverty and unemployment in Kerala, it argued. Moreover, the imposition of artificial birth control would undermine the self-determination capacity of human beings, it argued, generating a sense of helplessness and defeat in human beings. The church also invoked Indian culture and traditions to add a nativist and patriotic subtext to the criticism. Apart from going as far as praising communist China and USSR for considering a mouth to be fed as two hands capable to work, and two working hands can feed four mouths. Interestingly, later by early 1960s, church became wary because the campaign gained momentum and also was getting wider acceptability. And accordingly, it re-articulated its criticism by suggesting that it was not against family planning as such, but it is only opposed to artificial birth prevention. It could support family planning conducted in accordance with God's laws, that is through self-restraint and through the system of safe period. Whilst the church continued to appeal to the Christian notion of divine care, it sought alternatives and argued that only solution to problems engendered by population growth was to make use of the thousands and thousands of acres of virgin land that was still available for colonization and cultivation. And it is said that God, due to his virtue and wisdom, had put down everlasting and imperishable resources in the nature, and man was endowed with intelligence and genius to utilize it. And it is the duty of the man to imaginatively make use of it. Mar Vallopalli, Sebastian Vallopalli, the first bishop of the Tillicherry Syro-Malabar Diocese, the most vocal supporter of this policy, called for migration and occupation of all available land to resolve the population problem, citing the case of Syrian Christian migration to Malabar as a case of divine care. And of course, he invoked again traditions, Vinoba Bhave, etc., etc. And I'll leave that. So family planning policy was also a problematic policy for the communists. They favored a development model hinging on the rational and planned exploitation of the human and natural resources through industrialization, modernization of agriculture, as well as expansion of agriculture. They called for distribution of land to the tillers, alongside demanding allocation of cultivable fallows for cultivation, and forest owned by both government as well as the private landlords for agricultural laborers. Apart from, of course, arguing for making use of all swamps along with forest lands for food crop cultivation. Now, interestingly, the tirade of anti-communists against the dangerous growth of communism often painted this atheist ideology as a veritable threat to the existing moral and ethical regimes, which is seen as an ideology that gives least importance to morality and family relations and strive to make women a public property. K. Damodaran, in 1953, countered this by citing the case of America, where, according to him, in 1941 alone, 6.8 lakhs foicides have taken place. It is a country where 1,000 divorces are occurring in every week, and 1 out of 12 newborn there taking birth with an uncertain paternity. In contrast, he projected Soviet Union as portrayed as a country where foeticide was illegal and culpable and was being appreciated by even Catholics for its morality and commitment to family life. So communism is, projected as the most preferable moral system for Malayalis. The Communist Party criticized the Congress-led government for blocking the occupation of more than 5 lakh acres of old cultivable land in Kerala at a time when it was actually running the Grow More Food campaign. EMS Namboodiripad highlighted the inherent contradiction in Congress Party's development policies in Kerala. Invoking Nehru, he argued that modern infrastructures, dam, power stations, factories, etc., are described as the temples of national development, capable of securing decent livelihood and well-being for all. But on the other hand, it promoted family planning as the only means to resolve severe food scarcity in the state. EMS later painted family planning policy as a consequence of Congress Party's reluctance to adopt actual land reforms. Communist critics of family planning was accompanied by agitations in support of those poor farmers who fought with wild elephants, malaria, and cleared forests, and of course confronted oppression and robbery of forest officials and affluent forest bandits and produced food grain. This is a quotation from Ekikobalan, right? In the areas such as Amravati, Churli Kiritod, Kottur, etc. And that explains the reason why Communist Party was actually supporting the migrant settlers against the eviction attempts on all these locations. This was followed by, of course, the surplus land struggle under the leadership of AKG, as well as supported by people like Father Vadakan, underscoring again the centrality of farmers and the land in the communist development strategies. Now, to end the story, the end result was something very, very different. We can say that the Christian laity was caught between the campaigns of the state and that of the church. And they, by and large, adopted what state has advocated by switching to small family norm, as it seems to have suited their real-time concerns of having compact families as the best way of achieving mobility and development aspirations, right? As the demography clearly basically shows. Now, the third context is the present one, representing the growing anxiety from the church for the community's low growth rate and decline in the share of total population. As many of us know, it was recently the Pala Diocese under the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church issued a circular announcing incentives for families under its jurisdiction with 5 or more children, which includes a financial support, prior treatment in jobs in their institutions, as well as concessions to fee in professional colleges and a slew of other supports as well. Now, the move has created a storm in the state, many calling the move as an attempt aimed at sabotaging the family planning programs of the country and as an attempt to reinvigorate Christians on the face of the community's apparently dwindling electoral impact. It is also seen as very regressive in terms of women's status within families and with its potential to reverse the progressive demographic transition for which the state has been acclaimed for. The church justified its position by citing the decline in the birth rate in the Christian community. Diverse reasons like migration, falling prospects of agriculture, and lack of reservation in the government jobs and whatnot all reportedly contributed to this trend. A demographer endorsed this argument, of the church, and he added, I quote, "The church is too late to respond. This trend was evident even in the 1960s. In fact, Syrian Christians were the first to adopt family planning. It can be correlated with the high literacy among both men and women in the community, even as early as 1931. Let's remember that it was 1931 the Christians actually increased, in the most rapid manner. The bishop of the said diocese justified the decision by saying that, quote, it's a reality that the population of the Christian community is going down. Our growth rate is less. That is also a reason. But the immediate reason is to provide assistance to large families who are struggling to make both ends meet due to the pandemic. Now, interestingly, on the other hand, many within the Christian community opposed the move and hoped that this move was just an aberration of an individual bishop, which was actually not the case. Because, if you look at the Christian leadership's intervention during the last 2 decades, this was continuously, coming to the public. Writer Paul Zechariah stated that this is a human right violation because it reduces the responsibility of women only to giving birth and raising 5 or more children, which will, of course, take the major part of a woman's life. And women activists among the Christians felt that attempts like these were enough to backtrack the progress achieved by women all these years. It is also pointed out that the church was concerned about the shrinking population of priests and nuns who mostly take care of the huge properties owned by the church in the form of convents, hospitals, schools, etc., which became a concern because ever since small family became a norm, that significantly restricted the familial capacity to dedicate children for the service of the church, right? So all this has been pointed out as, reasons behind this move. Importantly, declining proportion of the Christian population has received some amount of academic consideration. Next slide. The writings of a senior demographer belonging to the Syrian Christian community, K.C. Zechariah, has been arguably informed by such a silent figure. This is a table that Professor Zechariah has worked up from the census report, census reports. Now, after giving this table, he has been conspicuously selective in his description of the situation in the subsequent pages of the book. And he states, I quote, "An important aspect of the relative sizes of the 3 religious groups in the is a reversal in the relative strength of the Christians and the Muslims in recent years. Until about 1971, the Christians were more numerous than the Muslims in Kerala. However, in 1981, the difference was 176,000 in favor of the Muslims. The changeover took place sometime between 1971 and 1981. By 2001, the Muslim outnumbered the Christians by almost 18 lakhs. And by 2021, the gap widened to 27 lakhs, right? And the gap is likely to widen in the coming years as the growth rate among the Christian population is likely to slow down further, and that of the Muslim population is likely to remain very higher. As we can, this table itself actually suggests the demographer has been silent about the proportion of the Hindus on the one hand, but more importantly, the demographic transition that both Christians and Muslims have undergone during the period from 1901 to 1971, right? During the period in which Muslims had an edge over Christians in the beginning of the 20th century, and which turned by 1931, and Muslims regained their edge by 1981, as the table clearly shows. Interestingly, the Pala bishop was not an exception. Declining population of the community has been a growing concern among a section of the community, at least for the last 2 decades. Individual dioceses and few bishops were advocating similar measures since mid-2000s, with an aim of increasing the demographic forte of the community. On the one hand, there were occasions in recent past itself in which communities came together in opposing statist interventions in this regard. For instance, in 2011, when the draft Kerala Women's Code Bill by the government of Kerala proposed to penalize families violating 2-child norm, the Christian, Muslim, and the Hindu leaders collectively raised their opposition to the move. In 2008, the Kerala Catholic Bishop Council, KCBC, has initiated a concept called large families, with 3 or more children to each couple. Our Pala bishop has actually increased it to 5. Right? Apart from promoting large families, the strategy included advocacy of early marriages and shunning contraceptive measures, though without yielding much success. Syro-Malabar Bishop of Tamarasheri Catholic Diocese had issued a pastoral letter in 2017 exhorting believers to ensure that their boys get married before the age of 25 and girls before they turn 23. While the Bishop of Idukki Diocese has issued a pastoral letter advising the church members to give up the use of contraceptives and other birth control measures. Earlier in 2008, Archbishop of Thrissur called for ending the practice of abortion for the interest of religion and humanity. Reason being, of course, the falling number of Christians. I quote him, "The fact that the Christian population in Kerala fell from 24% to 19%, of course, I don't know from where he is getting this number, in the last 50 years, should be an eye-opener to all. Hence, parents should strive to bring up every human life, realizing that mother's womb is a security cover given by God for the protection of life." Right? The pastoral letter said. Since then, the practice of honoring couples with, he also asked the church brethren to honor couples with more children. And since then, the practice of honoring couples with more children has become kind of a regular phenomenon in churches, apart from instituting a day called Pro-Life Day. After the recent effort from the Diocese of Pala caused massive controversy, KCBC publicly expressed its concern over the sliding birth rate among the Christians, which, according to them, have the potential of putting the very existence of the community at risk. The statement issued by the council also put up unsubstantiated numbers when it said, quote, "Earlier in the 1950s, Christians formed 24.6% of Kerala's population." Christians were never 24.6% of Kerala's population. But now it has reduced to 17.2, which is also not true. Christians have become the community with least birth rate, which is a rate of 1.8%. It is in this situation that various dioceses have come forward with projects to support families with more children. And it is not logical to consider population reduction as the only solution for social crises which arise due to improper developmental policies as well, unquote. Now, the concern over the dwindling size and advocacy of large families has also been informed by interestingly, the rising size of the Muslims in the state. The fear has led to tensions, manifesting itself in multiple forms. The growth of conservative elements in both communities have compounded the problem. In 2007, a Christian school in the state had invited the wrath of Islamic fanatics for including some churches in the itinerary of a picnic for school children. They threatened action against the school, saying that it had no right to take students, their children, from their community to the churches. The massive social media campaigns and discussions following the circular of Pala diocese was an indication of the growing tussle between the two minority communities, which was in the making for some time, picking up from both local as well as international issues. Say, for instance, the Turkish President Erdogan's decision in 2020 to convert Hagia Sophia, the Byzantine church turned museum, into a mosque, has perhaps a bigger impact in Kerala than any other parts, in India. So the relationship was already strained due to allegations of love jihad, for instance, by the Syro-Malabar Catholic Church, wherein it stated that Christian girls are being targeted and killed in the name of love jihad. Christian social media groups that subscribes to this conspiracy theory actively drive the love jihad narrative in Kerala with videos and messages warning of the danger and the necessity of protecting Christian girls from being lured to Islam through marriage. And of course, from the marauding Muslim infringers. The issue of minority scholarship, there are many issues. Maybe since the time is up, I'll leave those things. The minority scholarship issue has been one issue that accelerated the tension. The Indian Union Muslim League's opposition to the introduction of the 10% reservation for the economically weaker sections also angered the Christian leadership. Though the move has been criticized by Hindu community organizations like SNDP, KPMS, etc., also, who accused the left government of betraying the interests of the historically marginalized communities. And the Changanasheri bishop has termed the stand of IUML as rank communal, right? In response to the growing clamor of the Syrian Christian community for fair treatment and resolution of problems, the Kerala government has appointed a commission led by Justice J.B. Koshi to study the problems faced by the Christian minorities in Kerala by the early 2020. Now, the Bishop of Pala recently added to the narrative of love jihad when he said that jihadi terrorists are resorting to narcotics too, which is being used to trap non-Muslims, causing controversy over narcotic jihad, suggesting the Christians to draw their line clearly from the Muslims. Now, the bishop's statement had engendered severe consequences on the social landscape of Kerala, which has been, of course, celebrated, as we know, for peaceful coexistence and communal amity. Actually, it was, even though not so. The statement engendered a slew of protests and counter-protests and social media campaigns. Things have grown to organized media campaign by vested interests, Christian groups against two ready-to-cook packed food brands in Kerala, located in Iratupet, I guess. These brands are branded as supporting and financing the campaign against the bishop, as well as the assault on T.J. Joseph, Professor T.J. Joseph, by the extremist members of the Popular Front of India. Interestingly, the conflict between two minority religious groups are happening when the far-right Sangh Parivar is making attempts to negotiate inroads into the Christian community of Kerala for their electoral gains. It is apparent that a large section of the community has been buying and propagating the Sangh arguments against the Muslims, accentuating its boundaries against the Muslims in particular. Though at another level, the love jihad argument has been tried out against the lower caste Iravas too. In the Syrian Christian anxiety about preserving their superior caste status and endogamy. The large family norm is thus supplemented by an attempt to hold the community together by reiterating its boundary, accentuating its boundary, saving it from leakage to other religious communities in an effort to reestablish its seemingly lost vitality as a population. Let me stop with a limited conclusion. The three contexts discussed here tells us how demographic numbers are being subjected to diverse contextual reasoning and particularistic considerations. Anxieties generated are more a consequence of the politics outside. If it was its status as the largest and still growing Christian community under the non-Christian monarch that provoked statist majoritarian angst in the early 20th century Kerala, the Christians used the context of the state-driven family planning to justify their land colonization, land reclamation, agrarian expansion project that they were energetically pursuing, bereft of its, of course, ecological and human externalities. While the present context of fear is more informed by the context of majoritarian politics and the growing demographic cloud of Muslims, it also suggests that the context of majoritarian far-right kind of politics and the fear it unleashes can lead to unexpected and unprecedented community rifts and alliances, often under the pressure of short-term gains. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese. Now it's the time for question and answer session. Yeshudas Atyal has raised his hand.
Please speak.
Please.
Hello.
Yes, please go on.
You can start.
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Varghese, for the helpful talk. It was especially interesting to get the statistical details of the growth of different communities in Kerala, in Travancore, during the last 2 centuries. So that is very helpful, and I would like to thank Dr. Varghese for that. However, I have some critical comments. One is that I was a little surprised by the title of the talk itself. The title is Fear of Numbers, Demographic Anxieties. I mean, the title itself looked a little biased. As if the speaker was trying to make a point or deriding certain positions held by a certain. That could have been avoided, because I understand Dr. Varghese is an academic, is a professor in the University of Hyderabad, and what one would expect is more a nuanced approach that will take the total situation and the global context. But when you try to respond to populist issues and take much of the time of the talk for responding to, for instance, what a bishop of the Pala diocese said, I don't think the bishop was taken seriously by anyone here. And those of us who live in Kerala know that the bishop's statement did not have any impact. there is no considerable growth in the population in the Diocese of Pala or in any other diocese or church. And so it is obvious Bishop's statement is not taken serious. I was surprised that Dr. Varghese took so much time and effort to deride what a particular bishop said or some other bishop said. Those were passing issues, and those are not the real matter. And the serious matters are that any community, any society that develops and the population declines, and that we see in Europe is happening. In India itself, among the Parsi community, we can see the population is falling. And so that is, I mean, what the bishop says or doesn't say has anything to do with the rise of population. I wish the speaker took more seriously the theoretical issues behind the rise or fall of any population, and not merely the statement of one bishop, which is not taken seriously by most people. So migration is an important issue. And I understand Dr. Varghese is a scholar of migration. I didn't hear anything or said about how migration is affecting the population in Kerala. And we don't see family planning as a major issue in the population fall. Certainly the Parsi community in India.
May I request you to keep the comments and questions
Sure.
brief so that others will get a chance. Thank you.
And so I wish the speaker took more seriously the theoretical issues behind the fall in population rather than the statements of any particular bishop. That's all. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you, Varghese, for that very thought-provoking presentation. I just want to add one little thing for your thinking. See, you kind of gave us a context of the changing state in the first two instances. But in the third, I think maybe a little more elaboration would be useful, because in the 90s, early 90s, I think this is interesting coincidence happening between the rise of neoliberalism in India, and in Kerala too, the nature of the state is changing. It coincides also with the fall of communism, of course, and the Catholic Church's agenda of charity, changes. So I think in the 1990s, this is not well studied enough, but there is a clear swing of the clergy away from charity towards more enterprising business kind of orientation. So you can see all these social justice, social development initiatives of various community organizations, including Catholic Church, in education, health, etc., moving away from the welfarist moorings towards clearly profit. This is there in the education sector, particularly with self-financing becoming the norm. So what are the implications of this might be interesting to understand. For example, something like love jihad, this fear about love jihad. Because what I'm seeing in the 1990s is the shaping of community corporates, no longer community organizations. So the new monster is taking shape at that time, new animal, whatever it is. And this is not an animal which will bring people together. Like you said, you offered an account of how the individual was integrated into a larger collective. In the third part of your presentation, that is missing. I think that, if you think a little more about it, I think it's precisely the fact that this is no longer a caste community. It is now a caste corporate. So people are not integrated into it. And neither priests nor nuns or anyone is bothered to do that. So this is now outsourced to Hindu fanatics. So, young women who are falling in love across religions, marrying non-Christians, are to be disciplined by Hindu fanatics. And that's a kind of outsourcing that the church is literally, encouraging, though if not openly, but that is what it is in effect. So my only suggestion is that a better account of the changing nature of the state and church structures in the 1990s would be very useful, in bolstering the arguments that you make later on. So that is my preliminary.
Asha, is there another question from the virtual audience, or is there a question here? Rajeshwari.
My name is Rajeshwari Pidambaran, a research scholar in history. My question is how the church and the Syrian Christian community as giving a structure to changing livelihood patterns and corresponding migration, its gender role. In the first stage, for the agricultural expansion, Syrian Christian community as a voluntary team, they gave a leadership. And the Kottayam, Ernakulam, and Thrissur regions, we experience like stories. Purapadu, like films, explore its popular movement. And coming to the next stage, their position changed to education, health, and industrial structures. Then to now this time, making a minimum standard of living, migratory types leads by the community and their movements. Sometimes their leadership and its gender role. I would like to get a share from sir.
Yeah, I would concede to what Mr. Yeshudas has said, that empirical details are not brought into a theoretical framework. That's something that I will have to do. Now, but I don't agree with the fact that the Bishop of Pala and his overtures were a long kind of experience. That is not the case at all. If you look at the responses from the church, as I said, KCBC has actually come out with this proposal in 2007 itself. And individual dioceses were actually making different pastoral letters, at least from the late 20th century onwards. So that was very clear. So Pala Bishop was not a lone or exclusive experience, and there was widespread campaign which was going on, and I have cited some of them already. Now, more importantly, the social media campaigns that many of these groups are actually running is vicious. And generating hate and all sorts of tensions between communities. And many often those groups who are actually starting this campaign doesn't know what to do after a while, to handle this situation. That was the kind of campaign which is actually going on. And I was witnessing some of this campaign personally by myself, and that was very, very vicious. And it's a kind of loan or a kind of aberration is not an argument that I would concede. Second thing, for the, dwindling proportion of Christians in Kerala, migration is certainly a major factor. There is absolutely no doubt. As many of the bishops, one bishop has actually said that the Christian population has actually declined by 50,000, in the last decade, which is actually not true. The population has actually not declined in absolute number, right? The growth rate has actually declined. That is what happened, right? Every community is increasing, but the growth rate, there is a difference. Now, the table that I have shown you also show that the highest percentage of Christian population increase was in 1931, which was around 34%. Now, the highest percentage of Muslim population increase was in 1981, which was 37%. From there, it is actually consistently declining. And the last census, as per the last census, 2011 census, the growth rate of Muslim population in Kerala is 12%. From 37 to 12. So that's very clear. So as far as migration is, so what basically I'm saying is both communities were actually going a kind of demographic transition at two different points in time. We have to pay attention to that fact as well, right? Without perhaps jumping into absolutist conclusions, right? And this basically represents two temporalities in that sense. Now, Christian communities' migration is a major factor because, you know, many of the Christian families in central Kerala and southern Kerala are basically targeting the OECD countries where the chances of settlement is high. So as a result, they just leave, right? It's not a kind of temporary migration to the Gulf, you know, for which Muslims are, you know, mainly famous for in terms of proportion. I mean, so many of these families are actually migrating and settling forever. That basically creates a lot of, you know, dwindling in the population proportion. That's an important reason for the decline of, you know, the population. Now, I fully agree with Devika's suggestion. You know, we have to closely see how the state as well as the church hierarchy is changing over the last couple of decades, particularly under the influence of all these changes, neoliberal as well as the political changes happening. And the community is actually coming under the spell of the far right, you know, politics very, very clearly. And there is an intersection between that politics and economics, where economics is basically used by the political power to basically generate their consent. That's all happening. So that's an important point, and that's something that we need to explore more. And Rajeshwari's question on leadership and leadership of the church in migration. Church obviously played a major role in many of the migratory movements. In the case of Malabar migration, perhaps migrants went first, church followed them. But once church went there, church was very much part of the migrant life, and their struggle for staying put in Malabar and many other places. You know, say for instance, many of these anti-eviction movements, which has happened in many of these locations, church has actually played a leading role. And the involvement of the church has actually given a kind of moral character, moral weight to those struggles. And interestingly, from none of these places, settlers were actually evicted, right? Yeah.
Asha, is there a question?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. And Donald has something to ask.
Hello, thank you, Professor. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor, for this wonderful talk. I had a few questions. One, a lot of the data seems to have come from the Syrian Catholic kind of context. Of course, they form the majority among the Syrian Christians. But then what about the other denominations? What kind of discourse do we see when it comes to these issues? Is there any kind of, unity there at the level of the church? So that was one question. The second question, the non-Syrian Christians. I mean, in Casey Zacharias' work, Latin Catholic and their birth rates were recorded separately from Syrian Christians, and it showed a lot of difference also. So what about the demographic anxieties, or do non-Syrian Christians also share similar demographic anxieties? And the third question that I had was, how does the demographic anxiety, play out in transnational contexts, or even maybe outside Kerala? Because I remember that when in Haryana, when the Syro Malabar Church had its own diocese, they were very unhappy attending the Latin Catholic Church before that. And one of the things that came up during many of their deliberations was that we don't really want our children to socialize with the Latin Catholic children. So endogamy became a major anxiety, and ultimately they had their own diocese. These are the stories that I got to hear from that church. So these are the three questions that I had. And one comment on, I completely agree with you that the Pala bishop's comment is not isolated, because when I have been reading family histories for a very long time now, and these anxieties, let it be, when it comes to the dwindling numbers of nuns and priests, or the dwindling numbers in families, is something that is shared by family histories, family associations. It is mobilized and remobilized every year, these arguments. So it is not something that, is isolated. And yeah, that brings me to one more important, area of how families and family associations are trying to make sense of what is happening. And I see a lot of congruence between the right-wing shift and the articulations of family associations. Yes. Thank you so much.
Can I ask? Sir, can I ask?
I'm just going to misuse my prerogative as chair and ask my questions, because they lead on from some of the things that N. Donald has asked, and after that, perhaps you could ask. So one set of questions is what Donald was asking, which is about questions about caste and Christianity. How does one actually look at abstract number of Christians? How do we think about internal differences? Does the Syrian position speak for the CSI or Dalit Christians? How do we actually think about internal differences, and what does the number itself then mean? Who are we speaking about? The second is the large domain of population anxieties. Of course, I completely go with you. I understand the argument you're making for sort of pre-independence India and the ways in which it was actually being expressed here. But the interesting thing is that there is a, that's a period, sort of 40s onwards is a period where across the board, you find people expressing anxieties about population growth. And that continues, of course, in the Indian context for various kinds of reasons. And one Kerala example is C.J. Thomas, who had excoriating things to say about population growth. He was all for, family planning and population control, and he had very, very critical things to say. So, Rosie's book has that, even in the CJ. So she actually quotes the kinds of things he says. She says it ironically, but it's still worth looking at. But I was actually listening to you thinking about this from a contemporary period when we have anti-abortion kinds of movements coming back again all over the world. I mean, with Roe v. Wade being overturned and the question about marital rape not being taken seriously. So it just actually, I think there are other ways to think about the population question and why family planning or population control might have been a women's issue if one thinks about it from a different angle. But even that isn't the significant sort of contemporary concern. It's really the discussion that is coming from within climate change. So what are the question there to you really is, through this entire period, are there counter narratives? Do we have other discourses? If there is a push for population control, which casts it in, say, religious and other kinds of ways? Is there a counter narrative that tries to overturn it in some other way, which speaks to it, but addresses it differently? Is there something within the Kerala context that we can pick up on? The third, of course, your contemporary, the examples you were citing, I also don't agree that I go with your reading of the Pala bishop, and I take your response also to the question very seriously. But I thought that what might be worth exploring far more is the relationship between Hindutva and Syrian Christians. And that there is a sort of steady growth in many ways in which the Pala bishop's statement comes after a variety of other developments. And one has been seeing that with many of them. I mean, with people like Alphonse Kannanthanam and, Tom Vadakan and others, who all turn to the BJP. I mean, there are many examples of people who are politically active as well. So I think there is a great need to think about that. Other than the ways in which it's very easy to go back to a much older tradition of Christian versus Muslim. So outside of Kerala, there is a long history of conflict into which people can tap into also. So there's a very interesting kind of dual way in which, on the one hand, you have the Hindutva kind of strain. On the other hand, you have the old crusade being replayed again and that being invoked and so on. So I just wanted to hear your responses. Please.
Okay. What one gathers is that the demographic numerophobia on part of Sir CP led to the Temporary Declaration. So what happens is that in the Pala Bishop Circular, recent circular, is also a revival in the camouflaged ways of revival of the 1930s Syrian Christian fertility rate. So history repeats in camouflage guises, in disguise. That is my question. Is it the revival of the 1930s, the fertility rate of Syrian Christians rising or galloping in that days, and it is again want to repeat to establish the Syrian Christian clout or the religious clout? That was beaten by Sir CP by the declaration of Temporary. So there are similarities. Is there a similarity there in camouflaged ways?
No, the questions that Mr. Donald and Professor Arinima has asked about the internal differences. On the one hand, you can say that there are deliberate attempts on the part of the Christians to overlook these internal differences because of the current political context that is there. But at the same time, the internal differences is an unbridgeable reality as well, right? And there is absolutely no doubt about it. Now, when we speak about the Syrian Christian responses to these sort of situations, it's mainly the Syrian Christian, mainly the Syrian Catholic Syro-Malabar denominations, which is basically reacting to these sort of things. And as Donald has rightly pointed out, there is a difference in the demographic pattern of Latin Catholics and the Syrian Catholics. But at the same time, we should see that in the contemporary context of presenting a united front. Say, for instance, KCBC actually negotiate that space quite clearly, where even conceding to the fact that there is considerable amount of differences within that stream, it actually try to present a very, very united front. Now, most of these literature that I have read and the vicious campaigns run against this population dwindling experiment is mainly by the Syrian Christians and particularly by the Syrian Catholics. Right now, the transnational context that Donald was speaking about is interesting in the sense that many often when Syrian Christians migrate to not only just outside the country, but also outside the state, they come under a different denomination altogether. And that actually creates a lot of anxiety of purity and pollution. And interestingly, this has happened just not outside Kerala, but within Kerala as well, right? So, for instance, Syrian Christians have migrated to Malabar. There is no Syrian Christian hierarchy available in Malabar, right? It was under the Latin Catholic Diocese of Calicut. They were basically migrating. In the initial years, they were basically depending the Latin Catholic Diocese of Calicut for their spiritual needs. Many of these early churches established in the migrant villages were established by the Latin Catholic Church. But as the community gets strengthened, again, this problem has actually come back. There was a question of purity. There was a question of Syriac rite. There was an assertion. You don't believe, perhaps, in 1948, somebody called Joseph Kallidikal has actually written a piece called Malabar Kudiyattum Suryani Ritu, which was basically a vicious attack against the Latin Catholic hierarchy for trying to convert them into the Latin Catholic hierarchy. So that problem always plays out. And the result was that there is a sustained campaign for a Syrian Catholic diocese in Malabar. And finally, Rome has given up and conceded to that demand. And interestingly, a priest from Pala himself was appointed as the bishop of this one. So it actually plays out in outside Kerala as well as in other country context in this manner. Always this caste purity question comes in. Syrian has always been a claim for distinction, caste superiority, longer history, nativity, etc., right? Yeah, I thank you for that family history. Bringing that family histories and to know the kind of narratives that family history gives in this regard. Now, for your other question, the other ways of thinking about it, is an interesting, way to think about it. Perhaps. As far as I'm concerned, I haven't come across much details, regarding this problem to think about the population issue out of the box, because it is by and large decided by the overall, structure of the discourse. Now, I fully agree with you that the Hindutva Syrian Christian connection, as Devika was also pointing out, was a much more serious connection, which is determined by the larger political connections, the connections of neoliberal capital, the connections of institutions. Say, for instance, many of these institutions being run by the Syrian Christian churches are under the surveillance of the state. All these actually play out. But at the same time, as you said, that this is a context which is still unfolding. So we'll have to wait a bit more to see how it actually unfolds, because Syrian Christian community is a community which is very, very pragmatic as well as very, very opportunistic. If you look at their history right from the beginning. So their enormous amount of flexibility and pragmatism and opportunism, I would say, has been very, very vivid. So I think we need a little more time to understand how it actually plays out, as it goes on. Yeah. I don't know whether the Pala bishop's attempt is to recreate a 1930 kind of situation. I wish, it was not.
Again, Yeshdas Atyal wants to ask something.
Uh, uh, may I ask a small question?
Is it Yeshdas Atyal? Is the turn for Yeshdas Atyal?
Not necessarily. I just posed a supplementary question. That's all. Anyway, that's already there. It says the question is there any indication the statements of the bishops for increased population had any impact on the people? I don't think there was any impact. And so I wish probably sometime in future the speaker could do a deeper study of the issues involved in population fall. That's all. Thank
There's
you.
a question here. Can we take that, Fashia, first, and then we can take the questions where there are hand raise options, which I can see on the screen.
Sure,
So,
madam.
1934, that Kerala Hindu Mission was registered as a company, and it was due to the growing anxiety of the government at that time, the royal certain land grants were also given to them. But now, as you said, that Subramanian Iyer, the last president was Pachalur Rajaraman Iyer, and the remaining property was taken over by the government. Nothing belongs to the Kerala Hindu Mission as on now. And the conversion was mostly not from the Dalits, but from the Hindu Nadar community. I don't think that it's a round figure like 80,000 or so. Mostly the reliable records are those of Samuel Matir. That is in mostly, I think it was translated also. It is some of the records still remain in the MM Church. Whether you could clarify on this, it would be very nice.
Could we have the remaining two questions from Chandra and then Abraham Matthew?
So turn for Chandra.
First of all, I would like to thank Professor B.J. Varghese for delivering a warm and wonderful lecture. And this has literally enlightened many of us who really had very minimal connection with Kerala Christian history. But based on the lectures, I've got a couple of doubts which I just wanted to get clarified from Professor B.J. Varghese. The first question is that you have repeatedly quoted the statements of various denominations of priests of the church, and my question is that they are repeatedly, citing this family planning and the interreligious marriages as the reasons for the Christian population decline. But a couple of years back, I've read somewhere that there were about 45 to 50 lakh nuns from Kerala who would be going into different places to actually serve in missionary activities or in various hospitals in the world, being nurses or being nuns. So why is that aspect is not being touched upon by the Christian church priests? Is the first question of mine. And the second question is that I'm really someone who doesn't believe in love jihad. So I'm especially in the current scenario where the fundamental extremists in every religion is growing quite higher. So is that really that extent? Is that really is that really that important aspect to be considered in the decline of the population? Because in the current Indian society, even in Kerala, which was considered to be very much progressive compared to the other states, the interreligious or intersect marriages are very minimal to my knowledge. So, can you please clarify that important factor in reduction of the population? These are the two questions I did have. Thank you so much.
Can I now? Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you, Dr. Varghese, for the presentation. And in fact, I appreciate that you have gone through some of the facts of the growth of some of the communities. But the later part, when you speak about the census, you haven't really grappled with the dynamics of the growth of some of the other communities, like example, Muslims. So is it only the number or the exactly? I do believe that in a democratic setup, number matters. But at the same time, more than that, there are some economic aspects are also allied to this fear, especially when you talk about the fear related to the number. It's not only the number, there are some economic matters as well. Number one. Number two, I just would like to say that, as Jesua Satyal and all presented, that without taking account of the migration, presenting the number in Kerala is very dangerous, because people are migrating, large number of people are migrating to different countries and different states. And especially the Syrian Christian community, when you talk about that, there are number of dioceses have developed in US, UK, and all other countries. So that has not been taken into account. It's only the number within Kerala. That is very dangerous in one sense, that even I think the Dr. Scaria has pointed out that if the community doesn't have 2.4 birth rate, then that community will be in extinction, danger of extinction. That is the problem that really raise some of the issues within the community. Third, I would like to say that please don't go beyond the social media propagations, because that doesn't reflect the real community feeling. There are people who are against even the KCBC's decisions and even the decisions of bishops. So the community voice cannot be count only the reflection of bishops or the KCBC. Thank you very much.
No, on this Kerala Hindu mission, of course, it was, as I said, was started in 1934 with the specific purpose of Karvapasi, the old version, to bring the converted people back to the Hindu fold. And the number 80,000 that I have given is a number as cited in the census report of 1941, right? But we don't have any other accounts, or numbers, available from any other sources. Maybe, we don't know, but that is what the report basically says. And of course, conversion nadas, etc. is already there. And thank you for the information that the land allocated by the state to Kerala Hindu Mission has been now taken back. I don't know whether 40 to 50 lakhs of nuns were migrating from Kerala. That's an astonishing number. But of course, nuns have been migrating from Kerala, particularly to the European countries, right from the 1930s and 40s through the Catholic network, in particular. Also, nuns who worked as nurses, etc., have been working, and there is a system through which church was basically doing this. Now, on the question of inter-community marriages not the norm in Kerala, of course it's not the norm. Inter-community marriages are very less even now in Kerala, but they're not absent, right? inter-community marriages has been happening. There were, even though you can say that the number is very less, such marriages were always happening. All of a sudden, this has become love jihad. That was the problem, right? And that was the issue that I was basically, trying to highlight. Now, I fully agree with Mr. Abraham Matthew that without taking the migration numbers into consideration, we cannot get a complete picture about the population of the Christians in Kerala. And Christians, of course, is one of the most migratory communities in Kerala. And as I said, they migrate to countries with possibilities of resettlement. Settlement. So as a result, they are not really coming back, very often. Now, the heterogeneous voices within the community is also a fact. I have actually given an indication about this. Even when the bishops and the leadership is actually trying to paint this sort of a picture, there are many within the church who don't agree with this, right? And of course, church in that sense represent very, very polyphonous. And there are people who actively resist this. There are people who, actively disagree with, the church policy, not only in this, but also in many other, things. So, but what I was trying to tell was that the kind of discourse that the leadership and a section of the community was actually trying to create, which actually captured the attention of the society, and also the political imagination and the political context of the time. And we cannot really overlook that. That become the dominant kind of discourse, which actually creates a lot of fissures within our social landscape. And of course, I concede to the fact that there are people who oppose this within the community, and quite strong in number as well, right?
We have one more question from Amil Varghese.
And Pasha, could we make that the last question for this session?
Okay, ma'am. Amil Varghese. It's now your turn. Amil Varghese.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Ma'am, actually, I had asked the question in the chat box, but I was told that, I have to unmute and ask. So thank you, Varghese sir, for this insightful lecture. So my question is would you please explain more about the relation you made with family planning and Syrian Christian migration to the Malabar? And I also would like to know whether the land colonization scheme that was initiated in the 1950s favored the Syrian Christian community in any ways. Thank you.
No, what I was trying to tell was that one of the solutions that a section of the Syrian Christians were offering at that point in time, as against family planning, was that let us use the available landscape here, right? Thousands and thousands of acres of land is available here, and we are still actually clamoring about the high population growth rate, right? So let us use this and make use of this land, expand cultivation, and resolve the population problem in that way, right? And this was consistently discussed in the, Syrian Catholic public sphere in particular, right? Sebastian Vallapalli, who was the first bishop of the Tellicherry diocese, was the high priest of this argument. He was consistently writing in Satyadipam, in Deepika, in Giridipam, and all those periodicals in the 1950s and 60s about the need of making use of our own landscape for solving our food problem, solving the food crisis. So Malabar migration was cited by him as an evidence that there is a divine care. There is a divine care on the humanity, and that is why this opportunity has come. And this has actually shown us a path. And that was the connection that he was trying to paint, right? And as a solution to family planning, this was highlighted.
Chairperson Professor Thiruvananthapuram has joined with us. Sir, would you like to respond or add something?
Yeah, I just want to apologize to everyone that I was a bit late in joining the program. Therefore, I could not follow the details of the events that were raised by Professor Varghese. But what I could hear was, of course, an excellent presentation. And I hope I'll have individual level of personal discussion with Varghese on many issues, because these are major issues connecting the society of and this community with its well-organized structure has been an important player in the social political scene and also economic scene. I would only like to raise one point, which I'm not asking for an answer, since I got the feeling that Varghese was mainly concentrating upon the Syrian Catholic faction of the Christians. I got the feeling that the leadership of that community is mainly very interesting to concentrate on that, which is their own organizational setup is very different from that of the KCBC, in which different types of Catholic bishops are involved. I just wanted to point out this. So thank you very much, Varghese. We will have a personal discussion at some time or other. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now we are almost at the end of the session. May I invite Sandhya as a publication assistant for KCHR to deliver vote of thanks.
Good evening, all. This is after a while we have gathered offline, and the pandemic has fairly reserved us from gathering, and we have reserved to the online modes of gathering for academic sections. But now, without the fear of numbers, we have started gathering online with a very good subject on demographic anxieties and Syrian Christian responses in Kerala. And at firstly, I express my gratitude for our director, Professor G. Arunima, to have chaired this session. And of course, this session, this paper presentation by Dr. Vijay Varghese has inculcated a lot of discussions on migration, demography, and the politics, then far right and the left responses and all. I think we have had a lot in our mind. And thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Vijay Varghese, sir, for this wonderful presentation. He has been with us for a while as the scholar in residence of KCHR. And we have a lot of interactions from the public online and the offline. And I thank all of them who have responded to the session. And then, and though we have heard our chairperson very late, and I thank him for his presence. And then about the coordinating this session, Fascia has been for a while in the Kochi Center, but still I extend my gratitude to Fascia to have coordinated this well. And our KCHR team here has coordinated in all these things in often online, offline also. And I thank everyone who have gathered online and offline for this session. Thank you very much.